Welcome to HarmonyTALK, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here, people from all walks of life tell us about their dreams, how they fulfilled them, and the moment they knew there was no turning back. This podcast is sponsored by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. Happy to be hosting this episode. I'm Todd Stephens. My guest today rose to the pinnacle of professional sports when he landed his dream job as a linebacker for the New York Jets. But after a career-ending injury, he was forced to make the difficult transition from the locker room to the boardroom. Russ Cooke is now the founder and visionary behind NDUR for Athletes, an organization that aims to improve the mental health and well-being among student athletes. He's also an executive coach, respected business leader, and recently an author. Russ, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate you inviting me.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. And Russ, right now, there's literally countless numbers of kids out there who dream of making it in their favorite sport, whether it's Major League Baseball, the NFL. I assume that must have been your dream at some point. Did football always come naturally to you?
That's a great question. It came natural to me later in life, but when I was in Pop Warner football, I couldn't stand the game. I used to have a tear in my eye at the top of Binney Hill heading down to practice because I just hated the contact. But with all the peer pressure and all that, I had to keep going. So I was not a very good player. I did not enjoy the hitting and just stayed on it because my friends did. It was a weird start.
So peer pressure being good for you eventually obviously kept you in the game. Obviously something clicked at some point. Was it something that you did for yourself, or was it other people, like you said, peer pressure or coaches that really made you get the game?
Well, I started getting the knack of it. You mentioned in Pop Warner League, but I just didn't like getting hit. I don't know what it was. It was a stigma. I even was a catcher in baseball. And when I would catch, I'd turn my head and the umpire said, "Russ, you're going to lose your ear because there's no blocking there. So you have to look straight ahead. So if the ball does hit you, it's going to hit the steel and not your ear." So I was just paranoid. And to be very candid, Todd, I was very much bullied back then. I had a very thin build. I had very large ears, and people used to call me Dumbo. And one of them told me that I looked like a Volkswagen going down the street with the doors open. And bullying back then was pretty popular, and it was really cruel. So I counted all the bullies in my life and took care of most of them. But it was an interesting run.
And when you got to high school, was that when it kind of clicked for you between the size and the skill?
Yeah, when I got to high school, I started to mature, and I was much taller. I got to like 6'2". I was still very thin, but everything started to come around, and I got just talking to my friends and figuring things out. I had a great 40 time, and it was funny. Coach Noyes back then said, "What's the stigma about getting hit?" So he grabbed the back of my helmet, and we walked up to a birch tree, and he slammed my head against a birch tree, my face mask. I mean, he would probably be in jail now these days. And he said, "Now, is that bad?" And I said, "No, it was actually pretty cool." And after that, I turned into somewhat of an animal and just engaged and embraced.
That's a great story. But you're right, violent, especially in this day and age. And, what you're doing today with NDUR, obviously reflective of some of that, which we'll get to in a minute. But you had a pretty stellar college career also. You attended UMass, Amherst, correct?
Yeah, my career at Greenwich High School was a 4,000 3-year student body, so it was an institution. And at the end of my career there, I was tri-captain. I didn't have a spectacular season, but we kind of huddled, and my grades weren't that good. So we huddled, the three of us in my garage, and what are we going to do? We can't get in any good schools, XYZ. So we all agreed that we should go to a postgraduate, and we went to Tabor Academy in Marion, Mass as postgrads. We killed it. I mean, it was an all-male thing, so all I did is eat, lift, and study, and gained 35 pounds and had probably the best season in my career. I moved up to like 230 pounds and had a 4.75 40. And Coach McPherson actually recruited me. It was the start of an interesting thing. I didn't start with a scholarship. He said, if you start as a sophomore, or if you start in the spring of your freshman year, you'll be awarded a scholarship. And it happened.
And that's Coach Dick McPherson, who eventually went on to coach the New England Patriots, I believe, correct?
Yeah, he went to Syracuse where he was a god, and he kept very much in touch. Most coaches care about winning. They don't care about your personality, your issues, your problems. And Coach McPherson was a second father to me. He was my mentor. He was just a gentleman. And he actually wrote my foreword to my book 3 years before he passed away in 2019. It was a very sad situation, but he was spot on with a foreword and remembered more than I did. But he was a dear friend, mentor, and that's very rare that coaches can fulfill both of those dreams.
Well, absolutely. And when you talk about influence in your life, coaches, certainly with Coach McPherson, contact sports are, especially in this day and age, getting a very close look. Were your parents always supportive of your football career?
Yeah, concussions back then were unknown. And my mother, which was surprising from her, she passed away early in life, but she said to me my senior year in high school, you might want to focus on one sport and be the best at it instead of softball, basketball, football, this and that, tennis. And I took her advice and I said, I'm going to stick with football as the main source. And the others were just to kind of continue with exercise. And I had a good support family. My youngest sister, Libby, who was 6 years younger, was so supportive. She went to every one of my games in college. So proud of me. I'm so proud of her. And my older sister, Bonnie, did the same, but not how Libby engaged as far as just following my career and all that.
Oh, it's amazing. The importance of family, critical to lots of people's success, especially in athletics. Obviously, you come through UMass, and then at that point, were you thinking, I could have a shot at the NFL?
Yeah, Coach McPherson said you got to start long snapping because when you long snap and you have a 40 time of 4.75, you have a shot at basically special teams. So right after that, I had my sixth concussion my junior year, and I had to sit out because I had 6 concussions registered at UMass. I remember going back to the Southwest campus in my full uniform without my helmet, and one of the people stopped me and said, I think you need to go back and change because you're not supposed to dress like that. So I had some pretty tough time, but the doctors, the staffing, and all that stuff was pretty amazing. But anyway, to answer your question, I tried out for the Canadian Alouettes, and then I went to my final year at UMass with my girlfriend I dated back then to Hawaii, where I worked out, and I got a call from Jim Royer. It was an introduction from Coach McPherson to Jim Royer, and he wanted to sign me to a 3-year deal. So I dropped what I was doing, almost fell over. And the tough part is that I had to go from 270 down to 235 in 4 months because I was playing linebacker versus offensive guard. And I really wasn't a professional linebacker, but I was a very qualified special team player to learn linebacker as I went through. So I actually signed the contract in 79 for the 1980 season and spent a lot of time with the New York Jets off season before I started really digging in.
Now, when did it finally hit you that you were a player in the NFL?
I was interviewed on the radio and all that, but when I got to the camp and put on the green helmet, strapped it up, I just said, wow, because 1.2% of 450,000 student athletes go to the pros. So I was very lucky. I was gifted and very thankful and gracious.
Wow. And I imagine the emotion that was going through you at the time was once in a lifetime experience.
I did have a stigma about concussions, though, because I knew if I had one more, I'd have a problem. So that was in the back of my head and was a little bit nervous about it.
Well, and on that point, in 1979, unfortunately, your career came to a screeching halt in the NFL. Can you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, it sure did. I spent a lot of time preseason preparing, gym work and all that stuff, running every day. I actually was pushing my sister in the Volkswagen in the parking lot, just trying to strengthen my legs and stuff. Anyway, long story short, the second week of practice, I had the Rydell helmet that had the gel pockets back then. They don't have them anymore. And I tasted something very strange in my mouth. And one of the players said, your helmet looks like it's low. I said, well, I'm leaking something out of my brain, I think. And what happened was 2 of the front pockets blew. So I was literally playing with a shell. One of the players, Clark Gaines, came out. I put my head in his chest. And the next thing you know, I was on the back of an ambulance heading to Good Samaritan Hospital. And when I actually came to, I was really pissed because they cut my jersey off. They took my helmet. I said, I need all this stuff. What are you doing? But it was a sad situation. And then the head coach mentioned that they just, for my life savings, they just can't continue this. So I'm not registered because I didn't get into the season, but I am on the part 2 concussion list. And I worry about it all the time as far as what they say about concussions these days. But I went through a hell of a lot back then as far as depression, anxiety. What do I do now? It was my dream of my life.
Right. And you've built your whole football career, athletic career, academic career around that ascension to, the pinnacle of achievement in football, reaching the NFL. And when that was taken away from you because of obviously the concussion protocol at the time, thank goodness for your health. You mentioned depression, anxiety. That must just completely come down on you like a ton of bricks emotionally.
Yeah, it really did. I was very much alone. And the only one I could really talk to, I didn't really reach out to my parents a lot because I didn't want to bother them and get them worried. I wasn't seeing a doctor. I would talk to my friends, and they were my peer, my help, but they didn't have concussions, so they really couldn't help me, and just trying to talk to people. But going back to my old job that I had in college in the summertime, pumping gas, here this NFL player out of Greenwich, Connecticut, played for the New York Jets, and now he's pumping gas, and it was embarrassing.
That's amazing.
One day, one of the senior executives my father knew, who was CEO of Champion International, pulled over and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I just said, "I don't know. I'm a problem." So he said, "Go out and sell. You're a people guy and all that stuff." So that was a career change that I said, yeah, maybe I'll do that.
That's an amazing story. So one day you're at the pinnacle of your career, like you said, and the next day you're pumping gas. You must have been lost.
Yeah, I was lost. I was completely lost, but thank goodness I answered an ad for Purolator Courier as a sales rep. And I said, you know something, I'm going to hand out all these jet cards and try and sell these secretaries and all that sort of stuff. And it was working until I ran out of jet cards. But then I got the senior regional manager job. I got a call from one of my peers at Purolator, and he said, "You want to come up and run Boston Coach with me?" And I said, "What the hell is Boston Coach?" He said, "It's a car company owned by Fidelity Investments." So I said, "I'll take a shot."
Yeah, and those Jets cards must have gotten you into some doors that you wouldn't have gotten in otherwise, I assume.
Yeah, it really was a door opener. I'd sign autographs and do all sorts of stuff. So I used it as best I could since it didn't work the other way.
It's a great life lesson, though, about you have certain intentions in life, and sometimes life, throws you a curveball, to use a baseball reference anyway, and how you react to that almost as important as the incident itself that set you back, correct?
Right.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Purolator Courier, and for listeners who may not be familiar with it, package company back in the 80s, if I recall, comparable to FedEx, UPS, et cetera. And your job there was sales, regional manager eventually too?
Yeah, I got up to senior regional manager, and I took the general manager's position in New York City, and I was with them for 6 years, and then got the call from Gary Jama to come up and be senior vice president of operations for Boston Coach. After 15 interviews with the Fidelity leadership team, I finally got the nod, so I relocated the family from Stamford, Connecticut, up to Newburyport in 1986.
Oh, my goodness. And Boston Coach, an executive ground transportation company that, if I remember correctly, did large events, the U.S. Open, the Democratic or Republican National Convention. So not necessarily a taxi or a limousine company, but a high-level executive ground travel company.
We were really the only sedan company really out there in the market other than maybe Carry and a few small ones. So we priced it very low. We did Deck World. I remember the last Deck World I did, I had a pink jacket on and roller skates, and I ran into some horse poop and I went right on my face. But it was a lot of fun. Deck World was a 21-day event. We took close to 5,000 people a day back and forth from hotels. And Ken Olson basically sent me a thank you letter, who was the head of digital. And Jim Kirby, the senior vice president of Fidelity, sent me and my family to Disney World. It was worthwhile.
Now, coming from, a career in athletics, football, did everyone kind of look at that as a non-traditional executive preparation for these types of roles as you became manager and CEO?
It's a good question. I apply many of my skills from playing football or playing team sports, not necessarily as football, to business. I mean, if you're playing against 10 people, 5 people, or 4 people, your job is to go after one person, and everybody's job is to go after that one person that they're assigned to. And it's the same in business. You have to tackle the problem, the strategy, and you have to be successful or you can't win. Best days of my career, Todd, as you know, were when I was surrounded by the best people in the company. And it's not me. I remember one day, one of the senior members on staff said, "What were you doing at 3:00 in the morning in the garage?" I said, "I was washing cars with the drivers, getting to understand what the passengers are saying about Boston Coast, because that's the front line that no one can get to. And I think everyone else should be getting up at 3:00 in the morning once a month and doing the same thing." So I'm a very down-to-earth people person, but a very frontline oriented person. And I get that from playing sports and very competitive. And I just don't like to give up and lose.
No, it's a great story. Being closer to the front lines, in corporate America today, when you read what's happening, it seems that there certainly can be a gap between some of the senior executives and what's going on at the corporate office and what's actually happening on the front lines. So it's refreshing to hear that from someone from a CEO standpoint. So this phase in your life, you started NDUR for athletes.
Yeah. After I left Boston Coach, I said to myself, I've been through a heck of a lot, and I want to do something that was in my heart that can help what I went through. So I lost my godson to suicide 3.5 years ago. And previous to that, I wrote my book, From the Locker Room to the Boardroom, Going to the Edge. And I spoke to it and all that, but it wasn't enough. So I started a company called Next Season, and we now named it NDUR. It's on its way. And it's a peer-to-peer anonymous networking, educational resourcing support tool for the 450 student athletes across the country that are suffering from anxiety, stress, pulled ligaments, concussions, you name it. I don't like always using mental health because it can be a stigma, but I don't like saying that I have a mental health issue with concussions, but it's serious. The high 60% range, people are victim of injuries, concussions, depression, and the suicide rate is close to 9 to 10% because of COVID, because of isolation. So what this does, it basically is an app. It's available now in the App Store, and you basically are anonymous, and you fill out the whole rating system. What's your sport? What class are you in? Talk about your name. What's your injury or injuries? And the whole thing basically compiles and matches you on a peer-to-peer community with schools across the country. So if I have a concussion problem, I'm a freshman, I don't name my school, I could be talking to somebody at USC who's got the exact same issues, and we connect, we chat, we huddle, we locker room talk, and we solve problem, because that's who we go to. We don't go to the campus psychiatrists. We just don't do it. We don't go to the coaches because we'll get cut. And we like to keep it basically a little bit to family, but peer to peer. And we want to explode this community throughout the country. So we have 3 Paramount schools on right now that we're working in New England, and we're ready to launch this full time. And actually, we closed the deal probably 2 days ago and just waiting on the final. So it's pretty cool.
Russ, through your work with NDUR and the issues facing young athletes these days, and there are many of them, where is the NCAA and colleges and universities in all this?
I think it's top of mind. I think there are a lot of support tools out there that are very interested. The colleges are very interested in. However, I think that no one is focused on the peer-to-peer, which I think is the almighty connection. So we are talking to chancellors, we're talking to athletic directors, we're talking to assistant athletic directors, trainers, coaches, student athletes, and embracing ambassadors from within the schools to get the word out, because this is a whole new thing. There are a lot of different products out there right now, but this peer-to-peer is something that not all of them are doing, and we want to make sure we're first to market.
That's great. And any student athletes out there who are looking for that assistance should certainly search for NDUR, lowercase n, capital DUR. So you've identified your experience. You're so close to this, being at the pinnacle of your athletic career. And then the next day you're pumping gas, the emotion that you felt. And obviously that's 450,000 student athletes across the country right now. But, you said it's a very, very small percentage that will go on to make their sport their profession. And coming from those highs, being on the field, having the fans cheering, to the next day wondering, what do I do with the rest of my life? So it sounds like Endure is really a tool to help not only those actively engaged in athletics, but those who are now no longer able to play for one reason or another, or find themselves having to make that difficult decision. I'm leaving the fanfare. Now I have to get a job. I have to get into the routine of adulthood, so to speak, correct?
Sure. I mean, you can even chat on Peer Talk to support you educationally as far as, what do I do when I graduate? I'm not a professional player, so what am I going to do? But it's a peer-to-peer community that's basically, it's swimming, it's male, it's female. It's not around football. It's around total student athletes. And then we can move out to veterans down the road. We can move down to high school, who have close to 12 million. But we wanted to stay very focused. And it's my passion. It's my purpose because I lived it. It's pretty easy. And if I can save one life, Todd, one life, I've succeeded.
It's an awesome endeavor because there are so few people, I think, from the outside of athletics who can say that they've been there, they've lived it, and they've done it. So having folks from inside athletics who've been through these experiences and these emotions, I think is mission critical to helping these younger athletes through their difficult times, because they're not likely to say, I need a therapist, I need a counselor. That's just not where they are in their mindset at that current time, correct?
Right.
So peer-to-peer, talking to someone who's been through it. Well, you obviously care so much about helping other young people struggling through these experiences. Along the way, I have to mention that you and your wife, Jill, have raised 3 wonderful daughters, and you're a competitive guy, and I imagine growing up with Russ Cooke as a dad was an experience.
Yeah, there are 3 very special girls, and my grandkids, I have 5 now, and 4 rather. They keep me busy, but I never put any pressure on any of them. And they all played sports of some type, and they enjoyed it. And they didn't feel pressured by my background or anything like that. And they're always buying me apparel from the New York Jets. It's incredible. But if I have a license plate surrounding my plate that says New York Jets, I'm constantly getting ugly looks up here in Massachusetts. So I don't think I'm the most popular guy, the New York Jets up in Massachusetts. But yeah, I love my daughters and my grandkids, and hopefully they'll find their way. I don't think my grandson is going to play football, though, if I had my choice.
Do as I say, not as I do, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And your wife, Jill, I should mention her because she's been such a big part of your life and obviously a supporter. Where did you meet her? How did you come to know Jill?
It was after I left the New York Jets. I was with Purelator and went down to Florida with a couple of my friends from UMass and stayed at this crummy hotel. And we spent New Year's Eve. I walked downstairs. She was very pretty and still is. And she reminded me of somebody. I don't know who it was, but she had all the characteristics that put things together. And I was single at the time. So I asked, would you like to dance? And she said, not really. So I packed up, I went back to my room and I sulked the whole night. And then the next morning we became very friendly, and she lived in Connecticut and I was wearing a POW bracelet band. And I said, I'm going to give you this and I'm going to want it back, but I'm going to get it back in person. She said, okay. So when I called her, when I got home, she said, I have an 11-year-old daughter. I said, I don't care. It's not about your daughter. It's about you. So ever since then, we just carried on, and she had a job a lot harder than mine, taking care of the kids and stuff. I was the easy one.
Yeah, so it's a good lesson for anyone in any walk of life. Even if you're a former NFL player, kind of in the peak of your physical shape, and you walk up to someone, they could possibly turn you down. And
yeah, right.
But you should never give up, right? Never give up.
Yeah.
What advice, Russ, can you offer folks out there who may be facing down some of their fears or anxieties, whether they play athletics or not? You've been through challenges not only in your football career, but also through your professional life. Coming from a point of experience, now that you look back, what can you say to folks who may be facing their own challenges these days?
I would say stay in the moment. Do not dwell on the past, because you can't change that. So stay in the moment. That's the purpose of life now. Right now, I'm focused on talking with you. I'm not really too concerned on what I'm going to do tonight, but I'm going to stay in the moment. Don't make the same mistakes twice. There's no need to do that. So learn from your successes, and anything you can't control, don't worry about it. You're wasting your time. So those are the few things that I would say. People just are always complaining about climate change or this or that. And there are things you can do, but things like, we're going to have a thunderstorm tonight. Well, what are you going to do? Stop it? So why worry about it, And just try and enjoy the moment.
And sometimes when that worry gets too much, talk to someone, like you're saying with NDUR.
Yeah,
correct?
Absolutely.
Right. I think I recall you have a fear of flying, which is kind of funny. Or you did have a fear of flying. And I only say it's funny because you're a big, tough guy. You played NFL football. Do you still have that fear? And if so, how did you get over that?
Not so. It all happened back when I was a little boy, and my aunt was a pilot, and she got in a tri-pacer back then. It was called. It was I think it was a 2-seater or a 4-seater. And she came screaming over our house in Riverside, Connecticut, coming out of White Plains, veered to the right, and I just had a panic attack of my life. So I said, you can keep this. Even though they say flying's a lot safer than driving, your chances of survival are not quite as easy. But it hasn't bothered me as much because what are you going to do? I can't control the plane, right? So why worry about it?
Right. Great point. Your dream of making the NFL was achieved. You picked yourself up after an injury, found a way to keep dreaming and doing and achieving and remaking yourself, really. And with NDUR, clearly you're still dreaming and doing. All these decades since you've hung up your cleats, where does that hunger to do come from?
I think it comes from my family roots, and my parents were spectacular as far as supporting me. My sisters supported me, and they never pushed me to the point where I didn't want to do something. They listened to me, and people have to listen more. 80% talk, 20% listen, and it's got to be reversed. But it's the support. And most importantly, it's my close peer community that I grew up with. You hang around with the wrong people and you become the wrong people. So I think it's very important to embrace yourself with people who are caring, loving, and want to make some of their life.
Wonderful advice for anyone. That's for sure. Well, Russ, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing and being so open about your personal experiences. It's been wonderful to have you on the program.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope it helps one life.
We are sure it will. That's for sure. Thank you, Russ. We've been talking with Russ Cooke, former NFL player, corporate executive, and author of the soon-to-come book, Going to the Edge, One Athlete's Journey from the Locker Room to the Boardroom. He now spends his time focused on the mental health and wellness of young athletes through his work with NDUR. This is HarmonyTALK, presented by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Todd Stephens. For everyone out there, keep dreaming and doing.